Rain didn't wake Noah Pierce, his mother's cough did. It cut through their tiny Boston apartment, dry and deep, the kind that made a 5-year-old count breaths like they were running out. Lauren tried to smile it off, but her hands shook when she lifted the water he brought her, and the unpaid bills on the table said what she wouldn't. They were out of time. In the kitchenette, Noah bumped a stack of envelopes. Paper slid across the floor, and something heavier clattered free, a small wooden box, shoved beneath the mess like a secret. He glanced at the bedroom door. Silence. He lifted the lid. A gold ring flashed in the weak light, a blue stone too bright for a place this broke. Noah turned it over and saw the engraving inside. He sounded it out, letter by letter, until it hit him in the chest. Lauren. His mother's name. Lauren never wore jewelry, so why had she hidden this? Noah's child mind only knew one thing. This shiny blue stone was his mother's treasure, and maybe, just maybe, he could give it to a powerful man in exchange for a miracle to make her stop coughing. He slipped it into his pocket, took the spare key from the hook, and stepped into the cold gray morning alone, determined, and about to put that ring into the hands of the wrong man, or the only one powerful enough to save her. If this hook pulled you in, please like the video and share it with someone who loves emotional stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next chapter. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories every day. Noah pulled the hood of his jacket tight over his ears and kept close to the wall, as if the wind might blow his resolve away. Morning in Boston was so cold that his breath turned into white smoke, dissolving the moment he managed to see it. He didn't know where to go to sell the ring, and he didn't know who would buy it. But he knew one thing as simple as the very first edition problem in a beginner's primer. Someone with a lot of money could save his mother. The sidewalk gleamed with rain like a dirty mirror, and cars slid past, spraying water up onto the curb. Noah leaned away from a wide puddle, his hand still clenched around his jacket pocket where the ring lay, as if loosening his grip for even a second would let hope slip into the gutter. He passed an open cafe, where the warm smell of pastries drifted out and made his stomach clench with hunger. Then he kept walking because his mother's coughing still echoed in his head, clearer than the sound of an empty belly. He stopped in front of a pawn shop and stared at the glass, where lines of words were taped up that he couldn't fully read, though he recognized a few familiar letters. Inside, grown-ups sat and stood with the same weary look in their eyes. Noah stepped back. He was scared. He was scared they'd ask where he came from, ask where his mother was, ask why a little kid was holding a ring. He'd seen adults like that before. They weren't cruel, but they had a way of making everything complicated, and Noah didn't have time for questions. He needed money fast. He needed medicine fast. He needed his mother to breathe without pain. He kept going until he heard a car door close, crisp and solid, like a period at the end of a sentence. He turned on instinct and saw a black car pulled up tight to the curb, polished enough to reflect the gray sky. The man who stepped out didn't hurry. He was tall, broad-shouldered, in a dark coat, hair neatly kept, shoes so clean they didn't belong on a wet street. No one touched him, yet the crowd parted on its own, the way water shifts around a stone. 2 other men stood nearby. They didn't stare at anyone for long. They simply swept their eyes across the area as if counting every exit. Noah didn't know the word Mafia. He didn't know the word kingpin, but his body knew the feeling of danger and power. It was like when a teacher walked into the classroom without saying a word, and the whole room fell silent anyway. Noah froze, his heart hammering. He should have stayed far away from someone like that. Then he thought of Lauren. He thought of his mother's hands shaking as she held a glass of water. He thought of the envelopes on the table. Another thought rose up on top of the fear, heavier than fear itself. A man like that would definitely have money. Noah stepped out from where he'd been sheltering and stopped at a distance that was close enough to be heard, but not close enough to look like he was blocking the way. The man looked down at him. His gaze wasn't vicious, just cold and deep, like winter water. Noah swallowed and tried to keep his voice steady. He said his mother was very sick. He needed money to buy medicine, and he had something. Noah reached into his jacket pocket, took out the ring, and set it on his palm as if he were laying down a piece of his own heart. For a moment, the man only looked at the ring the way someone might look at a small object that didn't matter. Then his eyes stopped. Not on the blue stone, but on the inside of the band, where the engraving sat still like a cut that never healed. His pupils tightened. His shoulders went rigid as if he'd just heard a name called that only he could hear. 1 beat, then 2, He didn't blink. His jaw clenched so hard Noah thought he was about to say something cold. Something like, "Get lost." Instead, the man's hand trembled, barely, like someone fighting to keep himself from falling out of the image he'd built and lived inside. A breath caught in his chest. And then Noah saw the strangest thing. Those eyes dampened so quickly it was almost impossible to believe. The man turned his face away for half a second, as if it were a mistake he wasn't allowed to make, then turned back at once. He looked at Noah again, and this time he wasn't just looking at a child asking for money. He was looking at a large question standing right in front of him. His voice was low, precise, with nothing wasted. "What's your name?" Noah answered. "Noah Pierce." The man immediately asked, "What's your mother's name?" Noah said, "Lauren Pierce." At that name, the man closed his eyes for a single beat, like someone had dropped a stone slab onto his chest. He opened them again, his gaze sharpening, but not at Noah like a blade. It sharpened toward the past. He gave his name, Grant Hale, as brief as a stamp of confirmation. One of the men nearby started to step forward, but Grant only had to tilt his head and the man stopped. Noah didn't understand why, but he could tell it wasn't money being decided anymore. It was something larger. Noah hurried to say he didn't want to cause trouble. He only needed a little, just enough to buy the medicine. He pushed the ring forward an inch, as if he were afraid Grant would change his mind. Grant didn't touch the ring right away. He looked at Noah, then at the small hand held out, and in his eyes a storm was trapped behind a closed door. When he finally took the ring, he did it slowly and carefully, like he was holding something that could crack his life in two. Noah saw his fingers pause exactly over the engraved name, as if he'd touched that spot long ago. Grant asked Noah where he lived, the address. Noah hesitated. His mother had warned him not to tell strangers where they lived, but she'd also told him they had to live. Noah looked into those eyes and, unexpectedly, he didn't see cheap curiosity. He saw something that looked like pain. He recited the address in a small voice, trying to pronounce every number and every street name correctly. Grant repeated it once, not missing a single word, then looked straight at Noah. His voice was so calm it was chilling, as if he'd made a decision and no one was allowed to move him from it. "Take me there. Now." Grant didn't let them walk another step in the freezing rain. He motioned for the black car to pull up, and despite Lauren's weak protests, he guided them into the warmth of the leather seats. When Noah turned into the older block, the damp concrete steps and the hallway that smelled of cold moisture immediately swallowed the clean, polished look of Grant. Yet he didn't grimace. He didn't glance around like someone out of place. Noah stopped in front of the second-floor apartment door, his small hand squeezing the key until his knuckles went pale. He could hear his own heartbeat clearly, and inside that rhythm lived both the fear of being scolded by his mother and the thin thread of hope that everything might still be in time. Noah opened the door as quietly as he could, as if even the hinge might make his mother cough harder. Inside, it was dark and cramped. The air held the stale scent of cold tea mixed with cheap medicine. Lauren was lying on an old sofa, wrapped in a blanket, her face drained of color as if someone had pulled it out of her. At the sound of the door, she tried to sit up. Her tired eyes searched for Noah first, then caught the figure standing in the doorway. In that moment, Lauren's breath cut off. She wasn't just seeing a stranger. She was seeing a name buried under sleepless nights, a mistake she'd sworn would never reach her child. The weak yellow light sharpened his cheekbones and made his eyes look even darker. Lauren didn't need time to recognize him. Recognition struck so clearly her face changed as if someone had slapped memory itself. Noah was about to say something when Lauren choked out a sound, not calling for her son, but as if calling up a nightmare. She yanked Noah behind her at once, her hand clamping down on his shoulder like a shield, even though she was shaking. Her voice was rough with illness, but the cold edge in it was still intact. "What are you doing here?" Noah blinked, confused. He wanted to explain that he only wanted to buy medicine, but Lauren didn't give him the chance. She stared straight at Grant, with the vigilance of a mother who'd lived too long in defense mode. "I don't need you," she said, and the words weren't only for the present. They were for an entire stretch of life. Grant didn't answer right away. He looked at Noah for a beat, then back at Lauren. There was no triumph in his gaze, and no pity either. It was the look of someone who'd just touched something he'd lost, and was afraid it would vanish again if he blinked. Lauren tightened her grip on Noah's shoulder, pushing him farther back as if she could hide her son's very existence from that stare. She leaned toward the door, her palm braced on the edge, determined to slam everything shut right here. Then a violent coughing fit crushed her chest and folded her body inward. The cough was dry, deep, and it went on long enough that Noah panicked. He stepped forward, forgetting his mother's warnings, and reached out to steady her. Lauren tried to swallow the coughing down the way you swallow tears, but her eyes reddened and her lips went bloodless. Grant didn't move into the apartment, but his body shifted on instinct. He took one step forward, then stopped exactly at the boundary, as if he understood that one more step would send Lauren into panic. He looked at her condition, and in that moment, the rare softness in his eyes disappeared, replaced by the cold decisiveness of a man used to giving orders when lives were on the line. He didn't ask about the past. He didn't mention the ring. He didn't demand an explanation. He said, calm as if naming something that couldn't be delayed, "We have to go to the hospital." Lauren let out a short, raw laugh that hurt on the way out. "You think you can show up and give orders?" Grant looked at her and didn't argue. He only looked at the thin blanket, her colorless face, the tremor in her hand. He knew time wasn't on their side. Lauren still tried to hold the door, her eyes full of anger and fear. She wasn't afraid Grant would hurt her. She was afraid that if she let him step in, everything she'd built over 5 years would collapse. Noah stood between them, eyes wet, lips pressed tight, not understanding why the man he'd just trusted had his mother so terrified. Grant turned to Noah, his voice lower now but still nailed solid. "Get your mother her coat." Lauren snapped at once. "Don't listen to him." But Noah had seen the coughing fit. He'd seen his mother fail to stand steady. He ran to the coat hook, yanked down his mother's old coat, then came back, his small hands shaking as he helped her slide her arms into the sleeves. Lauren tried to push him away, but she didn't have the strength, and the truth was, she was afraid that if she kept fighting, she'd fall right in front of her child. Grant turned toward the door and signaled to someone in the hallway, then looked back at Lauren. He said it in a short sentence, blunt and final, leaving her nowhere to hide inside an argument. "Coat. Now." And when Lauren opened her mouth to protest again, Grant only tipped his head toward Noah, as if reminding her that every hard word meant nothing if Noah had to watch his mother collapse right here. Lauren swallowed, her eyes burning with anger and humiliation, but in the end she pulled the zipper up and clutched the collar tight, as if binding herself to this decision. Grant didn't lift her if she didn't allow it. He only stayed close enough to catch her if she swayed, and when Lauren stepped out of the apartment, Noah held his mother's hand, while Grant walked on her other side like a heavy shadow no one dared name. The door closed behind them. The hallway felt colder. Down the stairs, the black car waited as if it had been waiting for a very long time, ready to take them to St. Mary's Hospital. The black car moved in silence, as if the whole city instinctively made way for it. Yet inside it was full of small sounds that left Noah feeling like he couldn't breathe. There was the sound of his mother trying to hold back a cough. The zipper of her coat pulled up and then stopping halfway because her hand trembled. The sound of him swallowing again and again because he was afraid of being a bother. Grant sat in the front seat. He didn't turn around for long, but Noah could still feel him listening to every breath behind him, as if he were measuring something invisible. Lauren leaned into the seat and tried to keep herself upright, as though the moment she let her head fall back, she would lose. Noah wanted to hold her hand, yet he was afraid of hurting her, so he pressed his shoulder against the sleeve of her coat and turned himself into a small, steady point of support. When the car stopped in front of St. Mary's Hospital, white lights and rushing bodies hit them like another world. Grant got out first. He opened the back door without pulling Lauren out. He simply held his hand there, ready in case she chose to lean on it. Lauren looked at that hand for a beat, then forced herself down using her own legs, the pride she had left keeping her straight even as her knees went soft. Noah hurried close beside her, his eyes flicking over the signs, the sharp sting of disinfectant, the loudspeaker calling out patients' names, all of it making his head swim. Grant didn't bring them in like a display of power. He had only one man with him, standing far back like a shadow that kept its distance. And Noah found that strange, because this man could clearly make any place bend around him, yet here he seemed to be forcing himself to become smaller. The intake desk was crowded. Lauren had barely opened her mouth when a coughing fit crashed into her and folded her over. A nurse came at once, asked rapid questions about symptoms, checked her pulse, looked at her color, and brought a wheelchair. Lauren waved it away, saying she didn't need it, meaning she didn't want to be seen as weak. But the nurse only said it was procedure, not pity. Grant didn't cut in. He was so silent it made Lauren even more irritated, because she was used to powerful men either giving orders or manipulating the room. When they were taken into the emergency area, a middle-aged doctor, with bright eyes and a clipped voice, appeared. Dr. Michael Rudd. He asked a few short questions, listened to her lungs, glanced through the initial notes, then looked straight at Lauren the way you look at an adult who needs the truth, not a patient who needs to be soothed. He said her condition was critical, with signs of a severe infection layered on top of long-term exhaustion, and if they waited any longer, the risk would rise, so treatment had to begin immediately. Lauren heard every word like a sentence being read aloud, yet her defensive instincts made her turn toward Grant, as if she wanted to blame his sudden appearance for dragging everything into this shape. She said she'd handle it herself. She didn't need anyone to pay. Her voice was so cold you could see the shame sealed under the ice. Noah looked up at his mother, then at the doctor. He didn't understand the medical terms. He understood only one thing. His mother was in danger, and the adults were arguing over something that mattered less than saving her. Grant finally spoke, but not to rescue the moment with promises. He asked the doctor what needed to happen first, how long it would take, what papers needed to be signed. Doctor, Rudd answered like a man used to meeting people who tried to control a situation with money and authority. He said he'd follow medicine, not money, and the hospital had rules about privacy and about who was allowed in and out. Grant nodded at once. He didn't smile. He didn't challenge him. He only said the doctor should follow procedure. Lauren watched that response and felt even more unsettled, because it was as if Grant could buy anything with calm. When the nurse wheeled Lauren into the room for initial processing, Lauren turned her head and looked back at Noah once, trying to smile, but her eyes were red. Noah took a few quick steps after her and was stopped, because children weren't allowed into the first treatment area. Noah froze, his hand lifting and then dropping, as if someone had taken away the only right he understood, to stand beside his mother. Grant stood behind Noah. He didn't put a hand on his shoulder. He simply stayed close enough that Noah wouldn't feel abandoned in the hospital's cold white hallway. Noah heard the wheels rolling farther away, heard a door close, then emptiness. He wanted to cry, but he decided he had to be strong, because if he cried, his mother would worry. Grant looked at Noah, and in that moment, he saw something that tightened his chest. Not the wet eyes, but the way Noah tried to swallow the tears down, the way he pressed his lips into a straight line, the way he kept his hands from shaking by gripping the hem of his shirt. That wasn't ordinary childhood stubbornness. That was the restraint of someone used to living with scarcity and fear. Worse, it looked too much like Grant himself as a boy, the way he used to remind himself that emotion was a luxury, that if he fell apart, no one would catch him. Grant stared at Noah, as if he were looking into a warped mirror that still reflected truth. Noah looked up and caught that stare, and because he didn't understand, he asked one simple question that hurt to hear. "Is my mom going to be okay?" Grant didn't promise. He only said the doctor was doing everything that needed doing, and Noah had done the right thing by bringing his mother here. That sentence was a thin cord that tied Noah back to hope. Lauren wasn't there to hear it, but if she had been, she might have been angry, because she hated the idea of her son receiving praise from Grant. At the administrative desk, a staff member handed over forms and asked about insurance, asked who would be responsible for payment. Lauren wasn't there to refuse, so the question fell into an empty space. Grant wrote his name in the payment section, as if it were the only possible move, then paused at the exact moment the staff member asked what his relationship was to the patient. Grant looked at Noah, his expression softening for a beat, and answered simply that he was family. The words didn't make a scene, but they fell like a small stone dropped into a still lake, sending out ripples no one dared to look at. His phone vibrated lightly in his pocket. Grant glanced at the screen, then stepped into a corner of the hallway where the lights weren't as harsh, and called Owen Briggs. His voice was low and calm, but there was cold steel running beneath every word. He told Owen to find everything on Lauren Pierce, quietly, without letting anyone know, without letting anyone get close to her and Noah, and most of all to find out what had happened 5 years earlier that had made her disappear from his life. Grant ended the call and turned back just as Noah was staring at the treatment area door, as if he were staring at the place that held his entire world. Grant stood beside him, not taking one step deeper into territory Lauren hadn't allowed, but not backing away either. And for the first time, beneath the hospital's steady mechanical sounds, Noah felt that there was an adult in his life besides his mother, who was trying to keep him from falling. Time in the hospital didn't move the way it did out on the street. It stretched out and clung to your skin like the smell of disinfectant. Every minute held hurried footsteps passing by. Every door opening and closing made Noah flinch. Grant sat far enough from Noah that he wasn't pressing in, yet his eyes never left the treatment area door, as if one glance away would make everything collapse. Noah wasn't crying anymore. He only twisted the hem of his shirt in silence, sometimes flicking a look up at Grant, and then dropping his gaze back to the tile floor, trying to find something solid to hold on to inside himself. When Dr. Rudd stepped out, Noah sprang up instantly, almost running straight at him. The doctor said Lauren had received initial intervention. She needed close monitoring, and the treatment would take time. Noah asked if his mom was going to die, the question bursting out before he could stop it. Dr. Rudd didn't dodge it. He said that right now she needed medication and rest, and they'd do everything they could to get her through. But the family had to cooperate, and they couldn't take the patient home on their own. Noah nodded over and over like a machine, while Grant asked only one thing: "When can I speak with her?" The doctor looked at Grant, recognizing the type of man who was used to giving orders, then answered without giving an inch. "When she's more stable and wants to talk. This is a hospital, not a place for anyone to control." Grant nodded, accepting it the way you accept an unwritten law. "Because he didn't react, doctor." Rudd held his gaze for an extra beat, as if trying to decide whether that silence was respect or just another kind of control. Noah was allowed into the room for a few minutes. He walked in softly, as if the sound of his feet might hurt his mother. Lauren lay in the bed with an IV line running from her thin arm down to a bag of medication. Her face was still pale, but her breathing wasn't as frantic. Noah took her hand, so gently it was barely more than a touch of fingertips. Lauren opened her eyes, saw him, and tears spilled out before she could wipe them away. She whispered, "Where did you go? Why did you go out alone?" Words that carried both scolding and the fear of loss. Noah wanted to talk about the ring, about money, about Grant, but he saw Grant standing at the doorframe, not stepping inside, and every word stuck in his throat. Lauren followed her son's gaze, and when she saw Grant, her whole body went rigid, as if she'd touched live wire. A silence dropped into the room, heavier than the monitor's steady sounds. Noah didn't understand why his mother was looking at Grant that way, but he could feel two adults standing on an old fracture. Lauren motioned Noah closer, pulling him toward her like she was dragging something precious out of danger. Grant stayed at the threshold. His voice was low, not threatening, but not soft either. "Lauren," she let out a harsh laugh, broken and painful. "You still dare say my name like that?" Grant didn't answer her anger. He looked at the IV tubing, at the dark circles beneath her eyes, then looked at Noah, as if reminding himself this wasn't a conversation between two wounded adults. This was a conversation with a child listening with his whole heart. He said, "Noah, can you step outside for a moment?" Noah looked at his mother and hesitated. Lauren said no at once. "My son stays." Grant didn't argue. He lowered himself to Noah's level, his voice even quieter. "Stand right outside the door. If your mom calls for you, you come straight in, okay?" Noah looked at Grant, then at his mother. In the end, he nodded and stepped out, standing just outside where he could still see his mother through the crack of the door. Lauren watched him, then turned back to Grant with the sharp, cold stare of someone who'd sworn to bury the past. She asked what he wanted. Grant didn't speak about the ring right away, as if he feared that even mentioning it would make Lauren slam the door again. He only said he'd met Noah on the street, and Noah had offered him this in exchange for medicine for his mother. Grant opened his palm. The ring lay there, still. Lauren looked like she'd been punched in the chest. A brief flash of panic crossed her eyes, then anger snapped into place. She reached as if to grab it, but the arm with the IV line wouldn't let her move sharply. Grant didn't hold the ring like a trophy. He only set it on the small table beside the bed, out of Noah's reach if he ran back in, as a way of keeping a child from being dragged deeper into an adult story. Lauren gripped the blanket, her voice dropping lower, hoarse and cold. "You don't have the right to bring that here." Grant looked at her, and this time there was an open pain in his eyes, nothing hidden. "I didn't bring it to force you. I brought it because it's what made me realize I can't walk away." Lauren paused, and for a moment exhaustion thinned her defenses. She said the ring was an old keepsake, something she'd put away to forget, to make sure no one could find it, not even herself on the days when she was weak. She said Noah didn't know anything, and she didn't want him to know anything. Grant asked why. Lauren glanced toward the door where Noah stood, then looked back at Grant. Her voice was quieter now, yet sharper. Because your darkness isn't meant for a child. Grant tipped his head slightly, as if acknowledging a truth he'd already suspected. He said, I don't want to pull Noah into anything. I only want to know the truth, so I know where I'm supposed to stand in that boy's life. Lauren laughed, this time without any warmth. You think you have the right to demand the truth after 5 years of silence? Grant didn't strike back. He only asked another question, like a blade cutting straight into what she was avoiding. When was Noah born? The question hit the room like metal striking the floor. Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Noah through the crack of the door, at the small face trying to look calm while the eyes were still red. She looked back at Grant, and in her gaze there was a violent struggle between protecting her son and the fear that truth would destroy the little she had left to hold. She didn't answer. The silence lasted 1 beat too long for an ordinary question, and Grant understood. He didn't need a number. He didn't need a date. The way Lauren couldn't say it spoke for everything. Grant tightened his jaw, unclenched his fist, then looked at Noah again, as if he'd just seen his own future, and also the most dangerous weakness in it. He spoke softly, almost only for Lauren to hear. I won't say anything in front of him, but you and I are going to have to talk. Lauren didn't answer. She only turned her face away, but her eyes were wet. Outside the door, Noah was pretending he couldn't hear, yet he felt the room's air change, as if a large secret had been pulled out of the dark, and there was no way to shove it back in. Lauren turned her face to the wall as if not looking at Grant could make the past disappear, but a hospital didn't give anyone the right to hide. White light still shone straight onto everything people tried to bury. Noah stood outside the door, his small hands gripping the hem of his shirt, pretending he was counting the tiles on the floor, but his ears were stretched tight as a wire. Lauren drew in a long breath, her voice low and hoarse under the medication. Noah can't hear these things, and you can't stand close to my son. Grant looked at her and didn't react like a man used to being challenged. He only gave a slight nod, as if confirming a condition. I won't cross the boundary you set, he said, then paused for a beat. But I need you to say it once. Why did you disappear? Lauren let out a short laugh with no trace of joy. Why? Because you're Grant Hale. Because your shadow swallows all the light. Because I saw what you thought you could hide. She threw the words like a shard of glass into the air, then got cut by it the instant it left her mouth. Grant didn't ask what she'd seen. He'd heard too many people use lines like that to corner him into explanations. But Lauren wasn't there to bargain. She was a mother, and the fear in her eyes was real. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, her voice flowed backward into the past. A few years earlier, when Boston still had sunny days warm enough to make people believe their lives could be ordinary, Lauren worked the evening shift at a small restaurant near the harbor. Grant was younger then, and he hadn't yet worn the coldness that made people step aside. But there was already something in his eyes, something that made you feel you were standing in front of a door locked with layers. He never came alone. There was always someone standing at a distance. There was always a phone vibrating at strange hours. There were always half-conversations that ended in silence. Lauren had once thought it was simply the life of a wealthy man, the kind of work she didn't understand. Then one night, when she went out the back to take the trash, she heard Grant's voice in the dark, not loud, but clear enough that the words fell into her ears like stones. They weren't crude words, and they weren't bloody. They were just cold enough to numb a person. Shipments in, transfer route, leave no trace. Someone called him boss, reverent with fear, and Grant answered with one short sentence that made no one dare speak again. Lauren stood frozen, trash bag still in her grip, her heart slamming as she saw the real face behind the rare smile he'd once given her. She went back inside, her hands shaking hard enough to knock over a glass of water, and when Grant found her after her shift, she looked at him the way you look at a boundary that has suddenly appeared. He asked what was wrong. She didn't answer at first. She only asked what he lived on. Grant went quiet, then gave her a half-truth, half-evasion. He said he did the kind of work that kept other people from getting their hands dirty. Lauren heard it and felt a chill crawl up her spine, because that was the kind of sentence people used to turn darkness into necessity. She went home and sat in the bathroom with a test strip in her hand, watching 2 lines appear like a fate that didn't allow her to stay naive. She was pregnant, and in her mind, the image of a child layered itself over the image of secret phone calls, men posted outside doors, the words she'd overheard. She didn't hate Grant then. What terrified her was that she still had feelings for him, and those feelings could slow her down by one beat. And one beat of hesitation was enough to pull her child into something she couldn't control. She didn't tell him. She packed a few things, left on a morning without rain, changed her phone number, changed where she lived, changed even her last name if she had to, and swore that this child would grow up never having to learn the kind of silence people in his world used to survive. The past ended there, like a clean cut, with no return to add more. It only left a scar beneath every sentence. Lauren opened her eyes and looked at Grant in the present, and the pain came back as if it had never left. "I disappeared because I was carrying Noah," she said, each word scraping through a throat full of thorns, "and I wasn't going to ask your permission to protect my son." Grant didn't move. Not back, not forward, but his face tightened, as if something both unexpected and cruel had stretched it. He didn't ask why she hadn't told him. He didn't roar about rights. He only looked down at the floor for one beat, as if swallowing 5 stolen years, then lifted his gaze, his voice lower now. "I didn't search. That's my fault." Lauren laughed, tears spilling from anger, from exhaustion, from pain. "You say it like it's just a sentence." Grant didn't argue. He didn't try to scrub away guilt with pretty words. He only said it again. "I was wrong, and I won't stand here and demand you forgive me. But don't make me disappear one more time." Lauren gripped the blanket, her eyes going dark. "I only need you to stay away from Noah." Grant nodded as if accepting a verdict, then turned slightly toward the door where Noah still stood like a small shadow. He didn't look at the boy for long, afraid his eyes would say what no one had allowed yet. At that moment, Dr. Rudd came in to check Lauren again. He took in the tension in the room without asking personal questions, and focused only on numbers and symptoms. He said Lauren needed to continue treatment, and he had a few questions about family history, because there were factors that affected medication response and the risk of recurrence. Lauren answered vaguely and tried to avoid Grant's eyes. "Doctor." Rudd looked at Noah outside the door, then at Grant in the room, as if weighing something with experience. He added that in this case, he recommended running a few tests related to medical history and genetics to rule out risks, not out of curiosity, but for safety. The words fell between them like a new key. Lauren went rigid. Grant went rigid too. Even Noah outside the door could feel the room turn colder. No one needed an explanation, because everyone understood that those tests would open a door that, once opened, no one could pretend had never existed. After Dr. Rudd made his recommendation, the room felt as if someone had pulled part of the air out of it. Lauren stared up at the ceiling and tried to swallow her panic the way you swallow bitter medicine. For 5 years, she'd lived by a simple rule. She wouldn't let Noah become a name on anyone's desk, and she'd never let that name be spoken in the same breath as the Hale family. But the hospital didn't care about her rule. The hospital cared about keeping people alive. And Dr. Rudd made it clear this was medical procedure, not a moral question. He explained that testing was needed to evaluate risk, monitor medication response, and confirm certain details of medical history, things that could help them treat Lauren more precisely. Lauren wanted to argue, but she realized that every minute she fought was a minute treatment slowed down, a breath that grew thinner, a night when Noah might lose his mother. Noah stood close to the door, his eyes bright with confusion. He didn't understand what tests meant. He only understood that the adults were facing something frightening. Grant didn't force his way into the discussion with power. He only asked the doctor whose signature was needed, what samples were required, how long it would take. "Doctor," Rudd answered in short, practical sentences. "A blood sample and a few consent forms. Everything would follow policy. Most important, no one was to pressure the patient, because Lauren was weak." Grant nodded, then looked at Lauren. He didn't order her. He didn't make a long speech. He said one sentence, like a promise that was cold but solid. "You focus on getting well. I'll handle the rest under the law." Lauren gave a dry laugh because it sounded exactly like the kind of thing powerful men said, except Grant wasn't demanding she believe him. He was offering the least dangerous path in the only reality they had right now. Lauren looked at Noah, and her chest tightened with pain. If this testing pulled Noah in, if one signature exposed anything, she'd hate herself for the rest of her life. She turned to Grant, her voice hoarse and sharp. "I'll agree to the testing if you don't bring your people in here. No one stands around my son like they're guarding him. No one makes Noah feel like he's being watched." Grant answered at once. "Okay." Then he turned to the door and told the man with him to move farther back. keeping them out in the main corridor, away from the patient area. He cut down his own presence, as if to say the hospital was Lauren's territory, and the laws, not his. When the nurse came to draw blood, everything happened quickly and professionally. A few tubes were labeled. The consent form was read over and signed. There was no screaming, no sobbing like in cheap movies, only the soft scratch of a pen and the steady beep of the heart monitor, a sound that reminded you the body was fighting without caring about any other war. Noah watched the needle with fear, but Lauren tried to smile at him and said it was just a checkup so the doctor could help her get better. Noah nodded and tried to look brave. Yet when the nurse withdrew the needle, he still winced as if he felt the pain for her. Grant watched and felt something warm rise in his chest. Not anger, but recognition. Noah was growing up by taking care of someone else. The same kind of forced maturity no child should have to live through. Right after the samples were sent out, Grant stepped into the hallway and made another call, short and free of threats, purely arrangements. He asked for a family law attorney with proper standing, not a lawyer for the company, not a lawyer for the circles he moved in, but someone who understood privacy and the protection of children. He requested that the hospital add extra layers of security to the medical record, so no one could casually ask questions and get answers. He didn't use words meant to scare. He used the language of paperwork, authorization, confidentiality, responsibility. When he ended the call, he went to the nurse's desk and, polite and clear, asked to speak with whoever supervised hospital security. Not to bring his own men in, but to have the hospital tighten its own control, at least in this area. The nurse looked at him and could tell he wasn't ordinary family. But she couldn't dismiss him either, because his request still fell inside what the hospital could do. Lauren saw Grant come back into the room with a small stack of papers in his hand, and she tensed at once. She thought he was going to make her sign something binding. Grant set the papers on the table and said this was contact information for the family lawyer and the head of security. She had the right to call or not call. Everything was her choice. Lauren stared at the papers like they were a trap. Yet she saw something else too. Grant was trying to build a legal wall around Noah, instead of building a ring of strangers around him. Noah sat on the chair with his feet not reaching the floor. His eyes moved between his mother and Grant like a small bird watching the weather change. At last, Lauren asked the question she hated needing to ask. "How long until the results come back, doctor?" Rudd said, "Usually not long, though it depended on process." And he repeated that they were doing this for Lauren's treatment, not out of curiosity about anyone's private life. Lauren nodded and turned her face away, reminding herself she was doing this to stay alive long enough to raise her son, not for any man. Afternoon slid toward evening. The light outside the hallway windows thinned, and Boston became a dull gray block. Grant stood at a corner window looking down at the parking lot, a habit he couldn't let go of, always checking entrances and exits, always counting options. Then he saw it. A car that didn't belong to staff and didn't belong to visitors, parked where it had a direct view of the main entrance, parked long enough that it no longer felt accidental. The person inside didn't get out. They just sat there. Grant didn't call anyone. He didn't make a scene. He only watched and memorized the plate the way you memorize a warning, a reminder that darkness didn't vanish just because he was standing in a hospital. He returned to the room, his face still calm, but inside him a cold line ran straight down. Lauren was dozing in and out. Noah rested his head against the chair, eyes still open, trying to stay awake like a small guard at a door. Grant sat back down in his old spot, keeping a respectful distance from Noah. He didn't mention the car. He didn't speak about fear. He only watched the boy as if Noah were something that had to be protected at any cost. And in that silence another decision was forming, quiet and dangerous, heavier than any promise. The next morning at St. Mary's Hospital moved beneath a silence thin as paper. The kind of silence that exists only when people are trying to act normal while inside they're waiting for a blade to fall. Lauren woke in fragments. Each time she opened her eyes, she looked for Noah first, as if checking that he was still there. Then she looked around the room, as if she feared the past might be standing at the foot of her bed. Noah sat on the chair with his old backpack hugged to his chest. His eyes were heavy from lack of sleep, yet he forced them open wide. Every time his mother coughed, he startled and lifted the cup of water toward her, a reflex hammered into his childhood. Grant stayed, but he didn't crowd them. He appeared in the doorway when the nurses changed shifts, when the doctor passed by, like a breathing wall standing exactly where it should. and then he stepped back into the hall so Lauren wouldn't feel surrounded. Dr. Rudd returned with a thin folder. His face was calm as always. Yet the way he looked at Lauren and then glanced toward Grant showed he understood he was about to touch something that wasn't only medical. He said some partial results were back. A few markers still needed monitoring, but there was another finding tied to the genetic testing that had to be stated clearly because it could affect care decisions and paperwork later. Lauren frowned, one hand pressing into the blanket as if holding herself steady. She said she only needed to know about treatment, and the rest didn't matter. Doctor, Rudd met her eyes, his tone still direct. This is something that involves family, and I need adult consent. Lauren flicked a glance toward Noah, and immediately told him to step outside for a moment, to stand right by the door. Noah didn't want to leave her, but the look in her eyes was exhausted and hard, so he nodded and went into the hallway, standing close to the frame like a small shadow. Grant remained inside, but he took one step back, so the space between them wouldn't turn into a battlefield in front of the doctor. Dr. Rudd turned a page and said it plainly. The test indicates that Grant Hale is Noah's biological father. There was no thunder in the words, yet they cracked the room. Lauren sat still for one beat. Her eyes widened and then blinked too fast, as if she couldn't trust what she'd heard. Then her face flushed with anger, with humiliation, with an old pain dragged back out of the grave. She laughed, the sound broken and sharp, and then suddenly tears spilled down her cheeks, making her look both fragile and dangerous, like an animal cornered. She whipped around toward Grant, her voice shaking because she was forcing it to hold. You see, you wanted the truth. This is the truth. And what does it change? Does it give me back the nights Noah had a fever, and I held him alone in the bathroom just to listen to him breathe? Does it give me back the times I had to choose between rent and cough medicine? Grant didn't speak. His jaw tightened. His eyes went dark, but he didn't strike back, didn't blame her, didn't say she disappeared. He stood there like a man receiving a sentence. Doctor. Rudd looked between them, then said he'd give them privacy, and reminded them that Lauren's treatment remained the priority, and that this information would be kept confidential at the patient's request. When the doctor left, the door closed, and the air thickened. Lauren looked out to the hallway and saw Noah standing there like a small guard, his eyes still bright with worry. She inhaled once, then turned back to Grant with bitterness sharp enough to cut skin. I was alone for 5 years, she said, each word passing over a blade. I carried everything. And now you step in like a piece of paper gives you rights. Grant shook his head very slightly. No, he said. I didn't come to take rights. Lauren snapped. Then why did you come? Grant looked at her, and this time the pain in his eyes had nowhere left to hide. I came because of the boy. Because of you. Because I missed a stretch of life. I can't give back. He paused, then said the line that made Lauren catch. I didn't look hard enough. I should have looked. Lauren went rigid, like he'd hit something buried deep, but she didn't allow herself to soften. She said he didn't know the cost of living while always looking over your shoulder. He didn't know what it felt like to keep your child away from anything that could swallow him whole. Grant nodded, as if taking it in. I know my darkness can harm. I won't pull Noah into it. I won't cross the boundary you set. Lauren smiled without joy. A boundary. You say it like it's a line drawn with a pen, when for me it's the only thing that has kept my child safe. Grant looked toward the door where Noah still stood, and his voice lowered. I'm asking for one thing. Lauren watched him, the old wariness still there. What are you asking for? Grant answered slowly, clearly. A chance to stay and pay the debt. Not with money, with presence. By standing in the right place at the right time, and not disappearing again. Lauren closed her eyes and tears ran out from exhaustion, from anger, from the part of her that hated herself, because hearing that made her heart move. But she opened her eyes at once, as if slapping herself awake, and said, My rules are these. You only stand outside. You don't come into the room unless I allow it. You don't touch Noah. You don't tell Noah anything until I agree. And if you break the rules, you disappear from our lives forever. Grant held her gaze for a long moment, as if measuring whether this was a barricade or an opening. Then he nodded. No bargaining. No conditions. I agree, he said. Out in the hallway, Noah didn't catch every word, but he saw his mother crying, saw Grant standing as still as stone, and he felt something shift direction, as if his entire life had just been set onto a new road, whose name he didn't yet know. After the day the result was spoken aloud, The hospital didn't suddenly become peaceful. It only changed the kind of tension, from the tension of not knowing into the tension of knowing far too well. Lauren was still there. She still had to take medication. She still had to endure coughing fits that sent sharp pain through her chest. Yet what exhausted her more than the drugs was the feeling that a new truth was always waiting out in the hallway, waiting for its turn to breathe. Grant kept his word. He didn't step over the threshold unless Lauren called him. Every morning, on the dot like a cold clock, he appeared at the far end of the corridor and stood where he could see the door, without making anyone move aside. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring expensive gifts. He didn't arrive with an entourage. He came with empty hands and a calm face, as if calm was the only thing he could offer that wouldn't make Lauren hate him. Noah was afraid of that silence at first. He wanted to ask his mother what was happening. But Lauren always stopped the questions with a tight smile and the same line, that she needed rest, and Noah had to be good. Noah was good in a way that hurt to watch. He sat and drew inside the room, listening to footsteps in the hallway, sometimes lifting his head to stare at the door like he was watching rain gather on a porch. Whenever Lauren needed a nurse, Grant automatically stepped farther back and turned his face away like a guard who understood the rules, not listening, not pressing close. Sometimes Noah slipped out into the corridor out of curiosity and stood right by the door, staring at Grant like he was looking at a giant forced to stand still. When Grant saw him, he didn't crouch down and hug him. He didn't reach out and pull him closer. He only gave a small nod, greeting a child as if the child had dignity, then looked away again, giving Noah the right to turn back inside without shame. Lauren watched it all through the crack in the door, and the hardness in her didn't soften, but it began to change shape. She hated that a man who'd once been darkness could be patient like that. She hated that her instincts kept searching for the lie inside his behavior and couldn't find it. She hated most of all the growing sense that she couldn't keep believing he'd shown up only to control. On the afternoon of the third day, when Lauren had just been allowed to walk a few steps in the room and practice breathing, Grant's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and moved farther away, stopping in a corner of the hallway where his voice wouldn't reach the room. Noah saw Grant's expression shift in an instant, like a steel door snapping shut. Grant listened for a few seconds. He didn't say much, only a single yes, then ended the call. He stood still as if weighing something, and Noah could feel the air around him change, sharper. A moment later, Owen Briggs appeared at the end of the corridor. He didn't come close. He stayed at a distance meant for conversation that Lauren wouldn't hear unless she tried. Owen looked at Grant the way you look at someone who's doing something that doesn't fit his position. In a low voice, he said there was an important internal meeting, not the kind you could reschedule, and if Grant didn't show, someone would take it as weakness. Owen didn't have to spell out consequences. In their world, one absence at the wrong time could make others test limits. It could place an invisible blade at the throat of authority. Grant didn't answer right away. He looked toward Lauren's door, toward the thin line of light under it where Noah sat drawing, and in his eyes there was a kind of tearing that only people at the top understood. The price of holding a position was sometimes having to be everywhere except the one place you wanted to be. Owen pressed again. Just 1 hour, boss. You only need to appear, sign a few things, say a few words, and I'll bring you back. Grant closed his eyes for one beat, as if locking his old instincts away, the part that always chose power first. He opened them, looked at Owen, and said no. Owen froze. Grant said it again. No, I'm not going. Owen's voice hardened. What are you doing? They'll think you're distracted. They'll think you're being pulled by a string. Grant looked at him. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried something that made people go quiet without meaning to. Let them think it. Owen started to say more, but Grant lifted one hand, a small motion, like a period at the end of an argument, and Owen understood it wasn't weakness. It was a decision already stamped and sealed. Owen stepped back, his eyes darkening, and said if anything happened, he'd warned him. Grant didn't respond. He returned to his old position outside Lauren's door and stood exactly where he was supposed to stand, like a promise with a body. Lauren was leaning against the bed, breathing slowly the way she'd been taught, and through the crack of the door she watched Owen leave with a look of displeasure, then watched Grant still there, not stepping forward, not turning away. She'd met many powerful men, and she knew they always had reasons to leave, always had work to justify setting other people down. She also knew Grant's world didn't forgive moments of softness, yet he stayed. He didn't stay with words. He stayed by refusing a meeting that might keep his seat safe. Lauren felt her chest tighten in a different way, not from coughing, but from the truth that standing outside the door wasn't the easiest thing for Grant Hale to do. It was the most expensive. Noah cracked the door open a little and looked out, catching Grant standing there, and this time his eyes held more than fear. There was a flicker of something like surprise. Grant met Noah's gaze, gave a small nod, then held still again, as if one wrong movement would make Lauren close the door forever. Lauren leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, and for the first time since Grant appeared, she admitted to herself that some promises couldn't be measured in money. They were measured by what someone was willing to lose in order to keep them. That day, Boston was gray and heavy, like a wet towel laid over the entire city, and Lauren began to find she could breathe a little easier, enough to stand and circle the bed a few times without gripping too hard for balance. Doctor Rudd said it was a good sign, but he also warned that illness didn't forgive carelessness, and the monitoring still had to be strict. Noah heard that and nodded again and again, as if he nodded enough, his mother would heal faster. Grant remained outside the door in the exact same spot, not intruding, but today his eyes weren't only watching the room. They were watching the whole hallway too, like an instinct that refused to sleep. Lauren had noticed, and she hated herself for getting used to having someone there, used to it enough that if the corridor were empty, she'd feel the absence. That was why, when Dr. Rudd asked Lauren to come speak privately for a few minutes, her heart sank as if another blow was coming. A nurse led Noah to the small play area to draw. Grant stayed outside the door, and Lauren assumed it was only about medication. Doctor Rudd lowered his voice and said someone had tried to ask about her file at the administrative desk, not family, with no authorization paperwork and no medical reason. That person knew her full name and knew she was at St. Mary's, and they had tried to ask which room she was in. Staff had refused, per policy, and the hospital had documented it, but Dr. Rudd wanted Lauren to know, because it was an unusual sign of information intrusion. Lauren felt cold slide down her spine, even though the hallway lights were still bright. In her mind, the image of the strange car parked too long flashed up. Owen's words about the meeting rose. The name Grant Hale surfaced like a dark ink stamp. She turned and saw Grant at the far end of the hall, and anger flared before she could think. When Dr. Rudd left, Lauren walked quickly back to her room, pulled the door open, eyes red and voice sharp. You see, you brought this here. You pulled us into someone else's sight. Grant didn't ask what. He only looked at her face and understood at once that something had happened. Lauren told him, each word thrown like a stone. Someone had tried to access her file illegally. Someone knew she was here. And she said the thing she feared most. You and your world are touching Noah. Grant listened without arguing, without denying, without soothing her with empty lines. He glanced toward the play area where Noah was drawing, then back to Lauren. His gaze turned cold, like water freezing. Tell me what they asked, he said. Then he took out his phone, not to summon his people, but to walk straight to the administrative desk and request the hospital's information security manager. Lauren followed a few steps behind, partly because she wanted to hear, partly because she was afraid that if she didn't watch, everything would slide out of her hands. At the desk, Grant spoke politely but clearly. There had been an attempt to obtain information without authorization, and he wanted the hospital to activate a higher security level for the records of Lauren Pierce and Noah Pierce, restrict who was allowed to inquire, log every request for access, and notify them immediately if anyone tried again. The staff member kept their voice calm and explained policy, but Grant didn't pressure them with threats. He used the language of duty and legal risk, saying the hospital had an obligation to protect patient information, and he was prepared to sign appropriate authorization documents so those protections could be enforced strictly. Lauren listened, surprised. He wasn't turning this place into his territory. He was turning it into a system that defended itself, using its own law. After that, Grant asked for an additional binding document, not to take control, but to limit everyone, including himself. He proposed that it be stated explicitly that no one could approach Noah in the hospital without Lauren's consent, including staff without assigned duties, visitors, and anyone who claimed to be with Grant. Lauren went still. She'd expected him to find a way to open doors for himself. Instead, he was closing doors on himself. The staff handed over the paperwork. Lauren read every line with tired but alert eyes, and she saw her name placed at the center. The authority belonged to her, She looked up at Grant, and for the first time her voice held something other than anger. "Why are you doing this?" Grant answered briefly. "Because these are your rules, and because no one needs safety more than I need convenience." Lauren bit her lip. The defense in her didn't vanish, but it shook hard, like a wall that had just been struck in its weakest place. When everything was finished, Grant gave Lauren a copy, then turned away and stood at the corner window that looked down toward the parking lot. Lauren went back to the room, trying to stay calm so Noah wouldn't see, but her hands still trembled. She heard Noah ask the nurse where his mother was, and she answered, "I'm here. Everything's fine." While inside, she knew nothing was fine if someone dared probe a hospital record. Grant looked outside and saw the same unfamiliar car from the previous day, now in a different spot, as if testing whether he'd notice. He didn't take a photo. He didn't call the police. He didn't make it loud. He only memorized the plate again, then stepped into a shadowed corner of the corridor where the hospital cameras wouldn't capture his mouth clearly, and dialed a number he rarely had to use in a place this bright. When the other end picked up, Grant didn't say his name. He didn't need to. His voice was low, even, cold as steel held in ice water. "Stop." A pause answered him, as if the person was smiling. Grant went on, each word dropping like a warning that didn't require volume. "Stop looking at my family." The line went dead. Grant remained motionless for one beat, then returned to his post outside Lauren's door, his face calm, as if nothing had happened. But Lauren, watching through the crack, saw his eyes were different, and she understood that from that moment on, this story was no longer about a child trying to find money for medicine. It had changed names. After Grant's cold call, the hospital stayed the same bright white. Nurses still moved back and forth. Dr. Rudd still spoke in his calm voice. Yet Lauren felt as if a new layer of darkness had settled over everything. Not the darkness of night, but the darkness of being seen. She tried to hide it from Noah by doing small things. She straightened the blanket around him when he drifted into a light doze on the chair. She asked if he was hungry. She told him to draw another picture so he could show it off to the doctor later. Noah obeyed, but his eyes didn't look at the world with full innocence anymore. He had started to watch, the way someone watches when they have to learn how to read adults in order to survive. And the adult who made him watch the most was Grant Hale. At first, Noah only saw Grant as a wall, standing there, not smiling, not talking much, not like the men who bent down and asked children questions in a sweet voice. But as the days passed, Noah began to notice other small things. The way Grant always stood where he could see the doors, as if he never allowed himself to turn his back. The way he always waited for Lauren or Noah to speak first, as if he feared that one sentence from him would make Noah's mother shut the door again. The way he always looked at Noah before he left, but never for too long, as if his gaze could break the boy. Noah couldn't name the feeling. He only felt that those eyes weren't only cold, there was something in them that felt like sadness. One afternoon, Lauren was taken for another scan, and Noah had to wait in a small lounge outside, where there were a few children's books and a basket of thin blankets for patients. Noah sat alone with his legs swinging, trying to be brave, but the sound of a stretcher rolling past made him fold in on himself, remembering the first time his mother had been wheeled away and he hadn't been allowed to follow. Grant stood out in the hallway, keeping the rules, not stepping into the lounge because it was Noah's space when his mother wasn't there. But Noah could see him through the glass, and for a moment, Noah realized he didn't want to be alone anymore. He hesitated, then cracked the door open and looked up at Grant as if testing the ground. Grant looked down at him, his expression still steady. Noah whispered, "Is my mom going to be okay?" Grant didn't promise. He only said the doctor was doing what needed to be done, and your mom is fighting really hard. That was enough to steady Noah's shaking. Noah glanced at the blanket basket behind him, then looked down the long, cold hallway, and a child's thought popped loose. "If I build a blanket fort, my mom will feel happier when she comes back." Grant looked at Noah for a beat, as if he couldn't believe he was hearing that from a child inside a hospital. "You want to build it here?" he asked. Noah nodded. Grant looked around, as if checking whether anyone would misunderstand. Then he moved closer to the threshold. He didn't step fully inside. He only bent and pulled out one thin blanket, folding it neatly. He did it awkwardly, like a man who'd folded endless papers and plans but had never folded a blanket to play with a child. Noah watched, and, without meaning to, let out a small laugh, a sound as tiny as a drop of water falling on dry stone. Grant heard it, and a small crack flashed across his face, gone almost instantly, as if he'd forgotten he wasn't allowed to have feelings in this place. Noah pushed a couple of chairs into a corner and draped the blanket over them, making a little tent. Grant helped by holding one edge. His hand was careful, like he was holding the most fragile thing in his life. Noah crawled inside to test it, then stuck his head back out, eyes brighter. He said if Mom lay here, she would feel warm. Grant nodded, and there was a flicker in his eyes that looked like memory, like regret, like a question he didn't dare ask. When Lauren was brought back, she saw Noah sitting inside the little fort, hugging a children's book the nurse had loaned him, and Grant standing at the threshold holding a corner of the blanket so it wouldn't collapse. The sight made Lauren stop short. It didn't match any picture she'd ever allowed herself to imagine of Grant Hale. A powerful mafia boss wasn't supposed to hold up a blanket for a child. He wasn't supposed to stand in silence reading animal names from a book. He wasn't supposed to let his eyes soften because of a letter on a page. Lauren felt fear rise at once. Fear because it was too beautiful, and beauty like that made people believe, and once you believed, you got hurt. She went into the room. Noah ran to show her proudly that he'd built a tent so she wouldn't be afraid of the hospital. Lauren smiled, a real smile, and then suddenly her eyes burned. She turned toward Grant, about to say he didn't need to do this, about to rebuild the boundary, but the words caught. Grant only stood still, as if he understood that if he said anything, this moment would shatter. Noah tugged at her sleeve and told her to try it, and Lauren sat down nearby. She didn't crawl into the fort, but she put her hand on the edge of the blanket and felt the thin warmth Noah was trying to create. Noah opened the book and stumbled through a few words. Then he looked toward Grant out of habit, searching for an adult who would correct him. Grant didn't step in, but he quietly said the word, pronouncing it clearly, not mocking him at all. Noah repeated it, his eyes lighting up because he was understood. In that moment, he forgot he was supposed to hate Grant the way his mother did. He only saw a man standing in a hallway, sad as a room with no lights, yet still trying to hold steady so the boy's light wouldn't go out. Without meaning to, Noah let a word slip out. Dad. The sound was small, accidental, and it hit Noah like a slap the moment it left his mouth. He went silent at once, eyes wide, panicked as if he'd dropped something precious. Lauren froze, her heart tightening, as if that word had touched a forbidden place. Grant froze too. He didn't move. He didn't step forward. He didn't grab the chance to claim that word. He only looked at Noah, his gaze so gentle it hurt, then looked at Lauren as if asking permission through silence. Noah dropped his head, gripping the book, lips pressed tight as if he were afraid he'd cry. Grant didn't say anything to fix it. He didn't say the boy had said it right, and he didn't say the boy had said it wrong. He only stood there, as if one hard breath would break the fragile thing that had just begun, right in the cold hallway of St. Mary's Hospital. After Noah's accidental word, it was as if someone turned the volume down in the room. Everything was still there, but it all moved more carefully, as though one wrong motion could shatter the fragile thing that had just begun. Lauren forced her face into calm for her son, and told Noah to go wash his hands and get ready to sleep early. Her voice was too gentle, like a towel laid over a wound. Noah nodded and carried the book into the wash area, but his steps were slower than usual, and it was as if his ears could still hear the word he'd spoken, afraid of it and hungry for it at the same time. When Noah disappeared from the doorway, Lauren turned back at once. The sharpness returned to her eyes like an automatic lock snapping shut. She looked at Grant, her voice low but hard. "You can't let my son call you that." Grant didn't argue. He only gave a small nod, as if that word frightened him more than any threat ever could. Lauren gripped the edge of the blanket and fought not to shake. She said, "You've stood there long enough. You've got the paper result. You've done your nice little acts in front of the boy. Now tell me why you didn't look for me back then. Why you let me live like someone running while no one chased. Why you let my son grow up without knowing his father's face." Grant stayed at the threshold. He didn't step in even though she was saying his name straight to him, as if he wanted to speak yet still respected the rule of staying outside. He held Lauren's gaze for a long beat, then answered plainly, without circling. "The day you disappeared wasn't an ordinary day." Lauren gave a thin laugh. "For me, no day was ordinary, and I still stayed." Grant didn't answer the jab. He only said that at that time, inside his organization, there had been a purge of power. No blood and no details were needed. Those 2 words alone were enough for Lauren to understand what kind of undertow had risen. Grant said someone had wanted to push him out. Someone had wanted to use anything he cared about to drag him down, and she was the only thing back then that made him lose control. Lauren looked at him like she didn't believe it. Then her eyes darkened. "You're saying it like I was your weakness, like I'm supposed to feel honored." Grant shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm saying you could have been pulled in just because you were near me. I thought if I kept my distance, you'd be safe." Lauren let out a sharp breath of anger. "Kept your distance. You call vanishing from my life keeping your distance." Grant looked down at the floor for a beat, then lifted his eyes. His voice was low and direct. "I didn't disappear from your life because I didn't care. I disappeared from your life because I thought it was the only way they wouldn't use you as leverage. I was wrong to think I could control everything by cutting you off. I was wrong to not come looking for you right after." Lauren listened, and what hurt wasn't the explanation. What hurt was how it made sense in the worst possible way. She'd spent 5 years believing Grant was the kind of man who chose power and left everything else behind, and that belief had kept her upright. If he was telling her now that he'd stayed away to protect her, it meant that somewhere inside the suffering she'd carried there had been something closer to care than she wanted to admit, and that made her hate him more. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "You chose power. You chose to stay in that world even though you knew it would swallow anything you touched. I chose to stay. I chose to raise my son. I chose to work until I broke. I chose to shield him. I chose silence. I chose endurance. Don't turn your choice into a noble story." Grant didn't react like he'd been insulted. He stood still and took every word like a debt collecting interest. "I didn't come to argue about who's right," he said. "I know you stayed. I know you carried it. And I know I owe you more than an apology." Lauren stared at him, eyes red. "Then what do you want?" Grant breathed in and spoke more slowly. "I want a chance to do what I didn't do. To stay. Not to take anything from you. Not to pull Noah away. Just to stay the right way." Lauren laughed, sharp and tired. "The right way. You even know what the right way is." Grant didn't answer with theory. He only said, "I'll learn. I'll stay outside if you ask. I'll be quiet if you need. I'll sign anything so you feel you're still the one deciding, but I won't disappear again." Lauren watched him for a long time, like she was staring at a bridge she was afraid to step onto because she feared it would collapse. She wanted to say more, wanted to tear the promise apart, but a coughing fit came and made her turn away, and in that moment of weakness, she hated both the illness and the past for forcing her to lean on a man she didn't want to lean on. Grant didn't step inside to hold her up. He only called for a nurse in a calm voice, then returned to his old spot, like a man obeying the rules even while everything in him pulled tight. By then, Noah had finished washing his hands and was standing near the door. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but adult words still slipped into his ears like loose pieces of a puzzle. Danger. Move. Don't let them touch. Relocate. Noah didn't know what a purge was. He didn't know what leverage was. But he knew danger meant danger, and move meant leaving. He stood still, heart pounding, and inside his head a frightening child's conclusion formed. Dad is talking about danger. Dad is talking about leaving. Does that mean Dad will take me away from Mom? Or worse, is Dad the reason Mom hurts and coughs and has to lie here? Noah gripped the doorframe and bit down hard on his lip so he wouldn't cry, then stepped back very carefully, as if even his breathing might make the adults turn around. He went to the chair in the corner, hugged his backpack tight against his chest, and for the first time since he'd found the ring, Noah felt that hope in his pocket might be the most dangerous thing in the world. From the moment Noah overheard fragments of words like danger and move, he began to change in the way adults miss most easily. Not with tears or rebellion, but with obedience taken too far. The next morning, when Lauren woke to a nurse taking her blood pressure, Noah was already sitting upright in the chair, his backpack placed neatly by his feet, his coat folded carefully over the armrest. His eyes were wide as if he hadn't slept at all. But when Lauren asked if he was tired, Noah only nodded and gave a small smile that was too neat, as if he'd just learned how to hide feelings with his mouth. He stopped asking if his mother was in pain. He stopped asking what the doctor had said. He stopped watching the door whenever Grant appeared. Instead, he began picking up stray papers from the table, offering the cup of water at the exact moment his mother needed it, washing his hands without being reminded, sitting quietly in the corner to draw like a perfect child in the eyes of strangers. The nurses praised Noah for being so good. Lauren praised him too, because in her mind, her son's obedience was proof she was still doing the right thing, proof she was still holding the small world of mother and child together. But every time Lauren praised him, Noah lowered his head a little more, as if praise were a nail driven deeper into his silence. Grant kept his post outside the door and saw the change. Before, Noah had glanced at him with curiosity, asked small questions about his mother, stumbled through "We're in a book." Now Noah avoided looking at him the way you avoid something sharp. If their eyes met at all, Noah turned away at once, chin lowered, fingers gripping his backpack tighter. Grant understood in the way a man understands when he's being feared. He assumed Noah was frightened by the truth of paternity, assumed the boy needed time, assumed every step forward had to slow down so the child wouldn't bolt. He grew even more careful, spoke even less, held even more distance, as if being farther away would help Noah breathe. Lauren saw Grant keeping farther back and felt relief, because at least the boundary was still in her hands. She didn't realize Noah wasn't calm. He was collecting himself, like a storm stored inside a very small chest. Noah began listening to adult conversations by acting as if he wasn't listening at all. When Dr. Rudd stood by the bed talking about the treatment plan, Noah kept coloring, but his ears caught words like risk, monitoring, move, safety. When Lauren asked about discharge timing, Noah pretended to draw a little house with a red roof, but his fingers trembled slightly. When Grant and Owen spoke quietly at the end of the corridor, Noah didn't run closer. Yet he counted footsteps and guessed who was approaching the room. He became a small radar, searching for danger in every sound. The frightening part was that he did all of it without anyone noticing, because he was still well-behaved, still polite, still saying yes, still saying he was fine. At night, when Lauren drifted in and out of sleep, Noah was allowed to lie down on the pull-out chair in the room. He pulled the blanket up to his chin and turned his face to the wall the way his mother often did when she wanted to avoid looking at Grant. He didn't cry, because he'd decided crying was a waste of time. In the dark, Noah remembered the day his mother had coughed in their apartment. He remembered the feeling of holding the ring like he was holding a chance to save a life. Then he remembered Grant speaking about danger and moving. He remembered the cold along his spine when he pictured waking up one morning with his mother gone, or waking up to find that man taking him away while his mother couldn't stop it. Noah didn't understand adult rules. He only understood that if adults could vanish once, they could vanish again. And if adults said danger, then danger was real. The next morning, when Lauren was taken for imaging, a nurse led Noah to the waiting area. Grant stood out in the corridor, watching but not coming closer. Noah saw his mother's bag on a chair and remembered the wooden box that had once been kept under a pile of bills. And in his mind, a plan formed, both simple and ruthless. If things got worse, if his mother couldn't go home, if someone tried to pull him away, he needed something he could trade for medicine, trade for attention, trade for rescue. Adults could have rules, but Noah only had what he could carry. He quietly moved toward the small cabinet beside the bed, where the ring had been put back. He didn't touch it right away. He looked around like a thief, then hated himself for the feeling, because it was his mother's ring, because he only wanted to save her. No one was watching. The nurse was busy. The door was cracked open. Grant was far back. While Lauren dozed off under the medication, and Grant was distracted by a hushed call in the hallway, Noah rose onto his toes, slipped the ring into the pocket of his jacket, as if it were a habit carved into his skin. He moved fast and clean, leaving no trace, then returned to the chair as if nothing had happened, legs swinging, colored pencil in his hand. When Lauren came back, Noah ran to take her hand the way he always did. His mouth said he missed her, his voice soft, but in his pocket the ring rested like a new vow, a backup plan no one knew about. Lauren thought her son was only tired and scared of her illness. Grant thought the boy just needed time to adjust to the truth, and neither of them realized that Noah had taken on an adult's burden again, quietly, without calling for help, as if saying it out loud would make everything shatter into pieces. That afternoon, the hospital was busier than usual, the corridors crowded with the sound of shoes and rolling carts, and right then, Lauren was taken to another unit for a short monitoring procedure. Only a few dozen minutes, but long enough to make Noah feel separated from her one more time. He sat in the waiting area near the elevators with his backpack on his lap, both arms wrapped around it like a life ring. In the inside pocket of his coat, the ring was icy cold like a stone, but to Noah it was the only thing that could become medicine, become help, become his mother still alive. He looked around and saw exhausted adults passing by, saw nurses calling patients' names, saw the elevator doors open and close like the mouth of a monster swallowing people. A nurse nearby was talking with a coworker about shift changes, about charts that needed handoff. Their voices were low, but it was enough for Noah to understand that in a few minutes there would be a gap, a moment when no one would be watching him. Noah didn't think he was doing something wrong. He thought he was doing what was necessary. If Dad said danger, if someone was probing his mother's file, if there came a day when they were forced to move, then Noah had to act first. He didn't have a phone. He didn't have money. He only had the ring and his legs. He slid off the chair and walked toward the vending machines as an excuse, then turned toward the corridor that led to the main lobby. Right as the nurse stood to hand things over, right as a name was called from somewhere else, Noah slipped through the crowd like a small shadow. No one grabbed his arm. No one shouted, because he wasn't running. He was only walking fast, head down, eyes lowered like a child who'd been told to stay close to an adult. He passed through the lobby's automatic doors, and a rush of cold air hit him hard enough to make him shiver. But he didn't stop. He remembered how he'd walked out on a cold morning to save his mother, and now he was walking out again, as if life had taught him only one lesson on repeat. You have to save the people you love by yourself. Outside the hospital, drizzle fell in a fine mist, and wind slipped into his collar. Boston was so gray that everything looked like an old photograph. Noah tugged his hood lower, shoved his hands into his pockets, touched the ring to make sure it was still there, then followed the sidewalk toward the small square near the hospital, where he remembered there were shops and people coming and going. He didn't know who he would sell the ring to, but he believed that if he could find someone with money, he could buy extra medicine, or at least have something to trade for help if his mother got worse. Upstairs on Lauren's floor, everything unfolded like a slip on ice. When Lauren returned to the room and didn't see Noah, she first assumed he'd gone to the restroom. She called Noah once, then twice, keeping her voice steady the way she always did in front of him. No answer. Lauren pushed herself up with one hand, her heart pounding so hard it made her dizzy. She looked around. She saw the empty chair. She saw the backpack was gone. She saw the door ajar, and an emptiness opened under her feet like a deep hole. She stepped into the hallway and called Noah, her voice higher now, sharper with panic. A nurse rushed over and asked what was wrong. Lauren said, "My child is gone," and the words drained her face of color, as if the blood had been pulled out. Someone told her to sit down, but she couldn't sit. She clung to the wall, eyes sweeping wildly. Grant heard the calls from the far end of the corridor and ran toward them, but he stopped at the boundary a few steps away, because Lauren's rule still existed even inside panic. Lauren whipped around at him, eyes like fire. You see, danger, moving. Where is my son?" Grant didn't argue. He didn't say, "This isn't my fault." He only asked in a low, clear voice, "When was the last time you saw Noah?" Lauren said it was just now. He was in the waiting area, just now, and her voice broke. "I have nothing left if I lose him." Grant turned to the nurse and the floor supervisor and told them to activate the hospital's missing child protocol immediately. Lock down exits, pull camera footage, alert internal security. Everything fast, but no panic that might scare Noah if he was still inside the building. He didn't shout, but the way he spoke made people move. He gave Noah's description clearly. Dark coat, hood up, old backpack, about as tall as an adult's hip. Check the main lobby exits and the pickup drop-off area. Lauren shook with panic, eyes red, whispering Noah's name like a prayer. Grant stood a little closer, not touching her, but close enough that she wouldn't collapse. He messaged the hospital's security lead, then messaged Owen that everyone had to stay quiet. No bringing outsiders in, no chaos. Use only hospital systems and cameras. A security officer ran in with the update that Noah had been seen on camera passing through the main lobby not long ago. Lauren looked like she'd been punched in the chest. She lunged toward the elevators, but her legs were weak and she nearly fell. Grant called for a nurse to support Lauren, then took the elevator down himself. His eyes swept every corner, every door, every face, like a predator forced to hunt in the light. Outside, the rain still fell quietly and the wind had risen. Grant saw fresh water on the front steps, and small footprints pressed into it, wavy little shapes leading toward the street. He moved fast in that direction, not sprinting hard enough to draw attention, only walking like a man who knew he'd find what he was looking for. Near the square, under the awning of a grocery shop, a small boy sat curled in on himself, shoulders shaking, backpack clutched tight against his chest. Noah had pulled his hood low, but the wind flipped the edge of it up, and exposed eyes gone red from holding back tears. His hands pressed against the inside pocket where the ring lay, as if he let go, his mother would be lost. Mist clung to his hair. Wind slid through his sleeves. And Noah stayed there, gripping the one thing that made him believe his mother would live, while the adult world was tearing itself apart trying to find him, like it was searching for a heartbeat that had fallen and rolled away. Grant stopped beneath the awning and stayed a few steps away from Noah, as if moving too fast might send the boy panicking back into the rain. Traffic from the square murmured in the distance beneath the drizzle, while Noah sat curled in on himself, shoulders shaking, his hand still pressed hard against the inside pocket like he was holding a life or death secret. Grant looked at him, and in that moment, he didn't see a mischievous child sneaking out of the hospital. He saw a small life carrying fear far too heavy for its age. He lowered his voice and called Noah's name. Noah flinched and looked up, eyes red and stubborn like someone about to have the most precious thing in the world taken away. He stared at Grant like a man who might rescue him or steal from him. Grant didn't step closer. He said, "Your mom is looking for you. Your mom is terrified." Noah bit down hard on his lip. Tears spilled anyway, but he turned his face away as if to hide them, as if to prove he was still in control. Grant watched the way Noah fought not to cry, and something in his chest tightened with a familiar kind of pain, the pain of someone who'd taught himself silence in order to survive. He lowered himself slowly, then went all the way down on one knee, bringing himself level with Noah so the boy wouldn't have to crane his neck as if he were facing a wall. Grant put both hands on his own knees, open and empty. He didn't reach out. He didn't touch. He didn't force. Noah still didn't speak. Grant continued, "You're cold. Let's go back to your mom." Noah shook his head at once, violently, more force than his small body seemed to hold. Grant paused, eyes fixed on Noah like he was reading a hard word. Noah blurted out, voice trembling, "I can't go back empty-handed." Grant asked very gently, "What do you mean, empty-handed?" Noah clutched the inside pocket tighter, eyes dropping to the wet pavement. Then he said the line that made adults go still. "I don't want my mom to die." It wasn't loud, but it landed like a stone in the chest. Noah spoke fast, as if he slowed down he'd start sobbing. "My mom coughs. My mom's weak. The doctor said danger. I heard it. I have to have medicine. I have to have money. I have to do something. I don't want to wake up, and she's gone." Grant took in every word like someone squeezing his throat shut. He wanted to pull the boy close, wanted to say 100 things, but he knew one wrong move could make Noah afraid. He breathed in, kept his voice steady like he was holding a rope, and said the thing no one had ever said to Noah with enough weight. "It isn't your job." Noah looked up, eyes wide, as if those words were foreign. Grant repeated it, slower and clearer. "It isn't your job. You aren't responsible for saving your mom by pawning off your whole heart." Noah pressed his lips tight. Tears fell. Then he held out his hand, dug the ring from his pocket, and laid it on his palm like a confession. "I kept it," he said. "I know Mom will be mad, but I had to have it. If something happens, I'll trade it. I'll buy medicine. I'll pay. I'll do it." Grant looked at the ring, then at Noah, and for the first time he saw the full cruelty of the loop. A child learning how to be an adult because the adults around him hadn't been safe enough. Grant swallowed the catch in his throat and said, "Your mom is going to live. The doctor is treating her. We're going to do this the right way, and you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Noah blinked. The word we made him unsteady. Grant held Noah's gaze and didn't look away. He knew there was no room for retreat now. If he dodged, if he kept things vague, Noah would keep imagining worse. He spoke in a low voice, without drama, without circles, only the bare truth. "I'm your dad." Noah went rigid. He stared at Grant like a torn fairy tale dropped into his hands before he knew how to hold it. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Wind flipped the edge of his hood. Mist clung to his lashes, and he just stayed there, small, suspended between fear and a thin hope he didn't dare name. Grant remained kneeling. He didn't stand, so he wouldn't press Noah down with his sighs. He continued, "I'm not saying that to make you do anything. I'm saying it because you deserve to know, and because you don't have to save your mom by yourself anymore." Noah swallowed hard, his gaze wavering. Then, from farther away came hurried footsteps and Lauren's cracked, hoarse call. Noah. Noah turned, and the instant he saw his mother running through the rain, hair soaked, coat hanging crooked, face white with panic, he sprang up and ran to her. Lauren dropped to her knees and hugged him so tight Noah could hardly breathe, but he didn't protest. He clung to her like he was clinging to life. Lauren scolded him through tears and apologized through scolding. "You scared me to death." "Do you know that?" Noah sobbed and said, "I just wanted you to live." Lauren held him tighter, as if letting go would make him vanish again. Grant stood up slowly and kept his distance. He didn't touch them, but his eyes never left them. Lauren lifted her head and looked at Grant, eyes red and burning. She wanted to scream, wanted to pour all her terror onto him, but the words stuck because she saw something in his face she didn't want to see, something that looked like real pain. Noah looked up from inside his mother's arms, his face wet with rain and tears, then asked in a small voice, as if he needed to confirm something even scarier than cold rain, "If you're my dad, are you going to leave?" He swallowed, then asked again, the question that froze the air. "Are you going to go away?" Noah's question hung in the cold air like a droplet that refused to fall. Lauren held her son tighter, as if she could seal the whole world out, while Grant stood beneath the awning and looked at the boy with eyes that were both hurting and steady. He didn't answer with the instinct of a man who promised in order to be forgiven. He knew that for Noah, a promise could save or kill, because Noah had learned how to trust and then be left too early. Grant lowered himself again to Noah's level. His voice was deep, plain, without ornament. "No." Noah blinked, as if he couldn't believe one word could be that direct. Grant repeated it, still only one word. "No." Lauren stared at Grant, her expression tangled with hate and confusion, because she understood it was easy to say one word to a child and hard to keep it. Grant didn't look at Lauren for permission. He looked at Noah, then went on, slower now. "I'm not promising with feelings. I'm promising with a plan." Noah frowned, as if plan was an adult word, but he listened anyway, because inside him he was hungry for something even more than food. He was hungry for certainty. Grant said they would go back to the hospital right away. Lauren would continue treatment, and from now on there would be a clear schedule. Doctors, medication, follow-ups, adults responsible. He said after Lauren was stronger, they would have a specific visiting schedule so Noah wouldn't have to wait inside uncertainty. Which days Dad came, what time Dad left, and if Dad couldn't come there would be notice ahead of time, no vanishing. He said Noah's schooling would remain stable. No sudden moves just because of fear, but there would be a safety plan beside it. Pickup routes, approved drivers, and everything would require Lauren's consent. Lauren cut in at once. "I don't need you drawing my child's life like a work calendar." Grant looked at her, and this time he didn't answer with power. He only said, "I'm not drawing it. I'm putting up guardrails so you aren't alone anymore." Lauren was about to fire back, but Noah tugged at her sleeve, his eyes pleading, and Lauren swallowed her words because she knew her son had just lived through a fear bigger than any argument. They returned to St. Mary's Hospital under a heavy silence. Lauren was still furious, but now fury had to make room for keeping Noah still so he wouldn't shake, and for breathing carefully so she wouldn't collapse. Grant didn't touch Lauren unless she allowed it. He only opened doors, called nurses, followed procedure the way he had before, as if he were forcing himself to become part of the safety system rather than a storm that broke it. When Noah was brought back into the room and finally warmed up, Lauren sat down, her face pale with exhaustion, and she looked at Grant the way you look at a knife that has been wrapped but is still a knife. She said the rules were the same. He stayed outside. He made no decisions about Noah on his own. He brought none of his world anywhere near her child. Grant nodded, and he repeated it in a steady voice. "Every decision about Noah will have your written consent, and I'll sign documents if you want." Lauren didn't believe him yet, but she registered the fact that he wasn't trying to bend the rules the moment he had a chance. Night fell. Noah slept hard from sheer exhaustion, his hand still gripping the edge of the blanket as if afraid of losing it. Lauren watched him for a long time, then turned her face away to hide her tears. Grant stood outside the door in the same spot, but his phone kept vibrating, reminding him that the world outside didn't care about hospitals or feelings. Owen Briggs appeared at the end of the corridor, his face tight. In a low voice, he said there was a major deal that needed Grant's authorization immediately, a highly profitable gray route they'd been building for a long time. If they dropped it now, they'd lose their edge and leave an opening for someone else. Owen said it wasn't only money, it was position. It was a message. It was about who was leading. Grant looked toward the door where Noah was sleeping, then looked at Owen, and something in his gaze shut. Owen added, "Boss, it only takes one call. Step out for an hour and come back. No one will know." Grant didn't answer right away. He walked to the hallway window and looked down at the dark parking lot, remembering the strange car, remembering the cold call, remembering the way Noah had held the ring like a life. He understood that keeping that gray route would make him stronger, but it would also give more people more reason to look into Noah's life. He turned back, his voice low. "Pull out of that route." Owen froze, as if he'd just heard a suicide note. He drew Grant a little farther away, trying to stay controlled. "You're cutting off your own hand. You'll lose leverage. You'll get tested. They'll smell it." Grant met his eyes. His voice wasn't loud, but it was final. "Let them test." Owen clenched his jaw and asked, "What about today's deal?" Grant said, "Cancel it." Owen couldn't hold it in. "You're doing this for a kid." Grant didn't deny it. He only said, "For family, and because I won't let anything from that world touch Noah again." Owen looked at Grant like he was looking at someone else, then stepped back, anger and worry twisting together, as if he'd just watched his boss step down from a throne with his own feet. When Owen left, Grant's phone buzzed with a message from a number without a saved name, one short line with mockery soaked into every letter. "You're getting soft." Grant stared at the screen, then looked through the small window where Lauren sat beside Noah's bed, shoulders narrow, eyes red but still awake to guard her child. He typed back only one word: "Good." Then he turned the screen off and returned to his post outside the door, like a man who had accepted losing a portion of power to keep a portion of light. And this time he didn't step back at all. In the days that followed, Lauren recovered slowly but steadily. Her breathing eased. The coughing fits came less violently. A hint of color returned to her skin, and Noah slept more deeply too, no longer jolting awake at the sound of carts rolling down the hallway. Grant kept his word and stayed outside, as if patience had become a new habit framed by discipline. It didn't soften Lauren right away, but it did make her stop bracing so hard. She began thinking with a clearer mind, no longer reacting only out of fear. She realized that if she let everything drift on momentum, her son would grow up watching his mother get pulled back and forth between two worlds. Lauren hated that. She had run once, and the price had been 5 years of exhaustion, illness, and Noah learning how to become an adult. She didn't want to run again. So when Dr. Rudd said Lauren could be discharged on the condition of strict monitoring and follow-ups kept on schedule, Lauren didn't only feel relief. She immediately asked about the next steps, like someone planning a new life. Which medicines? What dosage? What follow-up schedule? What signs meant she had to return right away? She wrote it all in a notebook. Her handwriting slanted, because her hand was still weak, but her will stayed straight. When Noah saw her taking notes, he felt steadier, as if paper and ink could hold his mother in place for him. Grant didn't step in, but he stood close enough to hear what he needed to hear, and far enough that Lauren didn't feel her authority being stolen. When everything was nearly finished, Lauren asked Grant to meet her in the hallway, not to argue, but to talk like a woman who had decided. She leaned against the wall, still a little pale, but her eyes were clear and hard, and Grant recognized the version of Lauren he'd once known, the woman who didn't ask anyone for anything, only demanded exactly what was necessary. Lauren said the family rules would be this: every decision involving Noah required her consent. Not verbal consent spoken when she was exhausted, but clear consent. And if Grant wanted to stay in Noah's life, he had to accept those rules the way he accepted hospital rules. Grant held her gaze for a beat, then nodded. Lauren added that he couldn't take Noah anywhere on his own, couldn't contact teachers, doctors, or lawyers on his own, and couldn't assign people to watch her child and call it protection. Grant didn't respond defensively. He only asked how she wanted it bound. Lauren answered with a line that surprised him. With paperwork. Grant didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss it. He took out his phone and called the family lawyer he'd already arranged, told them to come to the hospital that same day, and made sure Lauren was present to hear every clause. When the lawyer arrived, the document was written in clear language. Decision-making authority stayed with Lauren. Grant's visiting schedule was specified so Noah would have certainty. Limits on access to school, medical care, and Noah's personal information All required Lauren's written consent, and any violation carried legal consequences. Grant signed without hesitation, his signature short and clean like a confession, and also like a promise. Lauren took her copy, stared at that signature for a long moment, then slipped it into her bag the way you store a knife with a handle, both a defense and a tool to protect yourself. Noah didn't understand paperwork, but he saw his mother's shoulders loosen, and he saw Grant wasn't angry, so he finally let out a breath, like a child who only needed the adults to stop fighting. When Lauren was discharged, Grant didn't push her into a luxurious place. He only asked where she wanted to go, and Lauren answered with a choice she had made herself. She'd contacted a housing support program for families rebuilding, and a social case manager helped her find a smaller but safer apartment with security features, close to school and close to the hospital, and most important, the lease was in her name. Lauren didn't let Grant put his name on it. She refused to let her new life become a debt. Grant agreed. He moved money in a legal form through a medical and housing assistance fund he'd arranged, but Lauren was the one signing the lease and holding the right to live there. On moving day, Lauren had only a few small boxes. Some of Noah's clothes, a few books, an old drawing Noah had made of his mother, and the wooden box. Noah hugged that box like he was holding a secret that had carried him too far. Grant didn't step into the old apartment without being invited. He stayed in the hallway and watched them carry things out, and when Noah stumbled under a heavy box, Grant only steadied the side of it without touching Noah, keeping exactly to the lines Lauren had drawn. At the new apartment, Lauren was the first to unlock the door and step inside, and she didn't rush into relief. She looked around, checked the locks, checked the windows, then finally called Noah in. Noah ran through the rooms, eyes bright because the windows were larger, because there was no damp smell like the old place, because his mother was smiling for real. Grant remained at the threshold, waiting. Lauren looked at him, then looked at Noah, and for the first time, she did something on her own without being forced. She took out her phone and called Grant, not to command him from a distance, but to invite him in the right way, at the right time, under her rules. Grant answered. His voice stayed calm, but Lauren heard a tiny pause inside it, like a man who had just been allowed to breathe. She said he could come, but he stayed outside until she said to step in. Grant said okay. Lauren ended the call, hated herself for the way her heart had moved, then reminded herself this wasn't softness. This was control through choice. That afternoon, Grant arrived on time and stood outside the new apartment door the way he'd stood outside the hospital room door. Lauren opened the door only partway and studied him, as if checking whether his patience would hold when it was no longer a hospital. Grant didn't move. Noah appeared behind his mother, eyes caught between excitement and fear, like he was standing in front of a man who had promised not to vanish. Lauren drew in a breath, about to speak, when Grant's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then stepped a few feet away so he wouldn't make Lauren tense, and took Owen's call. Owen's voice was low and urgent. Someone was tracing the information leak at the hospital back to a logistics route, and this time it wasn't a strange car or a record inquiry. It was a sign of an investigation that could become a legal strike, something that could put the Hale name onto official paperwork. Grant looked back at the doorway and saw Noah gripping his mother's shirt, saw Lauren standing as a shield by instinct, and something colder than Boston rain flashed in his eyes. He ended the call and returned to his spot by the door, his face still calm, but Lauren could sense a storm forming, a storm that wasn't only emotion now. It was a fight that would find a way to touch this small apartment no matter how many times they locked the door. Lauren's new apartment wasn't large, but it had light, and that light made everything look as if it could begin again, even though none of the three of them dared call it happiness. Lauren taped a schedule to the refrigerator. Medication times, meals, sleep, follow-up appointments, the day Noah would return to school, and the time blocks Grant was allowed to come, written clearly like a family treaty. Grant looked at that paper the first time and didn't smile. He nodded as if receiving instructions in a serious meeting, then stepped back on purpose so Lauren would remain the one guiding this home. Noah started going to bed earlier, not because anyone forced him, but because his mother's coughing had eased, because the room no longer felt damp and cold, because there was a small nightlight Lauren bought with saved money, and because he no longer had to stay awake guarding her breathing. The first nights, Noah still startled awake and still clutched the blanket, but Lauren sat beside the bed and rested a hand on his forehead like a reminder that she was still here. Grant didn't enter the bedroom. He stayed in the living room, heard Noah shifting in sleep, and learn to endure the helplessness of a man who couldn't use power to lull a child to rest. Instead, he did very small things he probably had never done for anyone before. He brought a children's book Noah liked, inexpensive. He fixed a loose window latch. He called the doctor to confirm the follow-up schedule, and then gave the information to Lauren. He reminded Noah to wear a hat in the cold, and he always stopped at the threshold until Lauren said he could come in. No glamour, no showy gifts, only repeated actions, like a man building trust one small brick at a time, slow and heavy. Lauren saw it all, and because she saw it all, breathing became harder. She'd lived too long having to do everything alone, so when someone else did part of her load without demanding credit, she felt both lighter and afraid. Afraid because if she got used to it, it would hurt if she lost it, and her life had taught her that beautiful things didn't last. Noah returned to school after the doctor agreed. On the first morning, he stood at the classroom door with his hand gripping the strap of his backpack, eyes scanning as if everything had changed too much. Lauren walked with him, her voice gentle but firm. "You only have to go in. You don't have to prove anything." Noah nodded, but his feet still hesitated until he glanced back and saw Grant across the street, not coming close, not drawing attention, just standing there like an anchor point. Grant didn't wave dramatically. He only gave a small nod, as if to say, "Go on, I'm here." Noah swallowed and stepped into the classroom. When the door closed, Lauren turned to Grant. Part of her wanted to thank him, and another part wanted to scream because she hated needing anyone. She chose a third way. She said, "You standing that far is right. Don't let anyone link my son to you." Grant nodded and said, "I understand." That answer didn't erase Lauren's caution, but it made her feel less alone. Over the next days, the new life began to find a rhythm. Lauren learned to eat full meals, take medication on time, and not push herself back into work too fast. Noah learned to sleep through the night. He learned to laugh when a classmate told a story without immediately thinking about bills. Grant learned something harder than holding power. He learned how to be present without taking up space, how to listen without controlling, how to accept that in Lauren's home, he wasn't the boss. He was only a father learning how to do it right. There were moments when Lauren caught Noah telling Grant about homework, about a new friend, about a cat they'd seen on the street, and she could hear Noah growing more natural with Grant day by day. Every time, Lauren jolted as if she were watching her son walk near a cliff, and that cliff was hope. She didn't want Noah hurt again, so she kept her rules tight, yet she began to understand that rules didn't have to mean a fortress. One evening, Noah knocked over a cup of water, and it spilled across the floor. Noah froze, eyes blinking too fast, bracing for shouting, because in the old apartment, anything spilled meant something you couldn't replace. Lauren let out a breath and told him to get a towel, then wiped it up with him. No yelling. Grant stood nearby and didn't jump in. He only handed over extra paper towels, then stepped back. Noah looked at the two adults, and for the first time he didn't shrink. He simply bent down to wipe, then looked up and gave an embarrassed smile. The moment was small enough to miss, but it was a deep crack in the wall of tension they'd built. That night, when Noah was getting ready for bed, he walked to the small shelf where Lauren kept the wooden box. He lifted the lid and stared into the empty space where the ring used to be. Then he pulled the ring from his pocket and placed it into the box with both hands, careful as if he were setting down a vow. Lauren stood in the doorway and saw it, and her throat tightened. Grant stood behind Lauren, not stepping in, only watching. Noah closed the lid, looked up at his mother, and said in a small but steady voice, "It's not for selling anymore." That sentence wasn't only about the ring. It was about Noah handing the adult role back to adults, deciding that from now on he wouldn't use his own heart as currency. Lauren stepped forward and hugged him, tears falling into Noah's hair, while Grant watched them in the warm night light and felt a moral circle close. But outside the window, darkness still waited, and he knew the storm beyond hadn't stopped. They had simply gained a roof that wasn't a fortress, but a place where a promise could be kept. In the days that followed, the small apartment found its own rhythm. Not loud, not glamorous, just ordinary mornings with Noah putting on his backpack for school, Lauren taking her medication on time and opening the window to let sunlight in, and Grant arriving exactly as scheduled on the paper taped to the refrigerator. He always stood at the door, never knocking too hard, never opening it himself, only waiting. That door had once been the boundary between fear and hope, between past and present, and now it became the final test of a promise. Some days Lauren opened it right away. Some days she made him wait a few minutes, as if asking herself whether she was trusting too easily. Grant never complained. He stayed outside like a man who understood that stepping in wasn't a right. It was permission. One afternoon, after Noah finished his homework, he ran to the living room, peeked through the peephole, then turned back and said softly, "Mom, Dad's here." The word Dad came out more naturally than before, no longer trembling. Lauren paused for 1 second, then walked to the door. She didn't open it immediately. She put her hand on the knob and drew in a deep breath, as if preparing to cross a line not drawn in chalk but drawn in memory. When the door opened, Grant was still standing in the familiar spot, not advancing, not demanding. Lauren looked at him. Her gaze wasn't blazing with anger anymore, but it wasn't dreamy either. She said clearly that this wasn't a fairy tale. A test result and a few good actions couldn't erase 5 years. She said he was allowed to stay because he chose to stay every day, and if one day he stopped choosing, this door would close. Grant didn't argue. He didn't overpromise. He only nodded and said, "I understand." And for the first time, Lauren leaned aside just enough to let him step across the threshold. Not because he was a boss, not because he had money, but because he had learned to stand outside long enough. The door opened from the inside, and that was the difference. Noah watched it like a small miracle. Not because their home had one more person, but because his mother was the one who opened the door. Life didn't become perfect after that moment. Grant still had to leave when time was up. He still had to take calls he wouldn't answer in front of Noah. He still had to face a world out there that didn't forgive softness. Lauren still had nights of light coughing and moments of exhaustion. She still had times when she looked at Grant and remembered the lost years. But inside all of it, a new truth was built out of ordinary things. That family wasn't a closed fortress. It was a place where people chose to stay and take responsibility. One night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Grant stood by the window and looked down at the quiet street. His phone buzzed. Owen sent a message, brief but heavy. A formal investigation file had been opened into logistics, and the name Hale appeared on the list of people to be reviewed. It wasn't a strange car anymore. It wasn't a question at the hospital desk anymore. This time it was paperwork, signatures, and the glare of conference rooms where no one needed a gun to do damage. Grant stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked into the room where Lauren was folding Noah's clothes, yellow light resting on her hair. He walked to the bedroom doorway and watched Noah sleeping deeply, small hand relaxed on the pillow. Grant whispered very softly, almost to himself, "Not again." Not a complaint, but a quiet declaration of war. He knew the storm outside hadn't stopped, and it might find a way to knock on this apartment door. But this time, he wasn't standing alone, and he wouldn't let Lauren and Noah stand alone either. The story closes here not with a wedding or a loud victory, but with a door opened from the inside and a man learning how to stay. The lesson probably isn't about power or money. It's about how a child shouldn't have to become an adult too early, and how an adult, if he's brave enough, can repair the damage through steady action every day. Sometimes what saves a family isn't a miracle. It's presence and responsibility. If this story touched your heart, please hit like and share the video so more people can listen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more moving stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Was there any detail that connected to your own life? Leave a comment so we can hear what's in your heart. Thank you for staying with us until the final minute. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.